Stanza 16. The old man still stood talking by my side, but now his voice to me was like a stream, scarce heard, nor word from word could I divide, and the whole body of the man did seem like one whom I had met with in a dream, or like a man from some far region sent to give me human strength by apt admonishment. The leech gatherer continues to speak, but now some dramatic changes take place in the scenario. Earlier, the leech gatherer had spoken clearly and firmly, but now what he utters flows out of his mouth like a stream. The poet is unable to divide one word uttered by the leech gatherer from the next word. In fact, the leech gatherer himself appears to be like a person met not in real life but in a dream. The poet even goes further and observes that it could be that some divine force had sent the leech gatherer from some far region to teach the poet the lesson of human strength by giving him appropriate warning, appropriate advice, apt admonishment. The contrast between the leech gatherer and the speaker could not have been more stark. The leech gatherer is wretchedly poor, while the speaker is reasonably well off. Of course, Wordsworth in real life led a life of poverty in the early phases, but by the side of the wretchedly poor leech gatherer, the poet is certainly reasonably well off. The leech gatherer is a homeless wanderer, while the speaker has a beautiful cottage, though of course it's a rented one. The leech gatherer appears to suffer from diseases and ailments. The speaker is a rather healthy young man. It is under these circumstances that the speaker has allowed himself to become a victim of despondency, of melancholia, of sorrow, of what we might now term depression. And the poet feels that the leech gatherer has appeared before him in order to give him apt admonishment, appropriate advice, appropriate warning, and thus teach him the great lesson of human strength. Stanza 17. My former thoughts returned, the fear that kills, and hope that is unwilling to be fed, cold, pain, and labor, and all fleshly ills, and mighty poets in their misery dead, perplexed and longing to be comforted. My question eagerly did I renew. How is it that you live, and what is it you do? The thoughts that had troubled the poet now return to trouble him once more. He is overcome with fear. His sense of hope is extremely weak. He is afraid of cold, pain, labor, and all fleshly ills. He thinks of the examples of great poets who seem to have lived miserable lives and died miserable deaths. The speaker is completely confused and desiring to be comforted. He questions the leech gatherer about how the leech gatherer lives and what the leech gatherer does. Stanza 18. He with a smile did then his words repeat, and said that, gathering leeches far and wide, he travelled, stirring thus about his feet the waters of the pools where they abide. Once I could meet with them on every side, but they have dwindled long by slow decay. Yet still I persevere and find them where I may. The leech gatherer gives the speaker a smile and amplifies on what he has already said. His occupation is gathering leeches. For that purpose, he travels far and wide, searching for leeches in every pool. Once they were plentifully available, but now they have dwindled. Still, he struggles, he perseveres, and he tries to find them where he can find them. It may be observed that leeches were used in Western medicine from the earliest times for bloodletting, and that over the centuries there was a sharp decline in the population of leeches in Europe, especially in England. One of the important reasons for this decline in the population of leeches was over-exploitation. Stanza 19. While he was talking thus, the lonely place, the old man's shape and speech all troubled me. In my mind's eye, I seemed to see him pace about the weary moors continually, wandering about alone and silently, while I these thoughts within myself pursued, he, having made a pause, the same discourse renewed. While the leech gatherer explained that his occupation was collecting leeches, the speaker became troubled by the loneliness of the spot where he had come across the leech gatherer, by the old man's shape, by the old man's speech, and in his imagination the speaker was able to see the old, tired leech gatherer who was probably not far from death. wandering up and down the moors in search of leeches, despite his difficulty, despite his misery, despite his problems. Meanwhile, the leech gatherer paused for some time and then started repeating what he had already said. Stanza 20. And soon with this he other matter blended, cheerfully uttered, with demeanour kind, but stately in the main. And when he ended, I could have laughed myself to scorn to find in that decrepit man so firm a mind. God, said I, be my help and stay secure. I'll think of the leech gatherer on the lonely moor. In the last stanza, we are told that the leech gatherer continues the conversation, blending other subject matters, mixing other subject matters with the subject matter of his occupation. His speech is cheerful, his behavior is kind, and there is a certain stateliness about him. When the conversation ends, the poet declares that he could have laughed at himself in contempt, in scorn. The fact is that the poet becomes keenly aware of the sharp contrast between himself and the leech gatherer. The speaker is young, healthy, relatively well off, and has a house to live in. The leech gatherer is old, obviously not healthy at all, wretchedly poor, homeless, and yet it is the leech gatherer who has a firm mind. The stanza concludes, the poem concludes with the speaker seeking the help of God, and the poet declaring that he shall stay secure, stay safe by thinking of the leech gatherer on the lonely moor. Thus, the leech gatherer becomes the ultimate source of inspiration to the speaker.